George Martin, our guest, is a program director at Peace Action Wisconsin and the national co-chair for United for Peace and Justice. It's going to be an event tonight in Milwaukee. He is with Peace Action Wisconsin again. George, thanks for your time.
Oh, glad to be here.
A couple events that you want to talk about. First of all, tonight's event?
Tonight here in Milwaukee, as we will be in 5 communities around Wisconsin, 333 communities around the state between yesterday and today, we'll be holding a vigil in commemoration of the 3,000 plus men and women who died in Iraq.
You said 330 communities in Wisconsin?
Around the country. Around the country. Wisconsin, 5.
And what are the 5 in Wisconsin?
5 in Wisconsin are Fond du Lac, Appleton, Hayward, and Janesville, in addition to Milwaukee.
And that's all tonight?
That's all tonight, yeah.
We hit this milestone, 3,000 dead, and in another month or so, we're going to be hitting 3 years in Iraq. And people talk about the lessons we learned in Vietnam, and I was thinking about those lessons today. And the first lesson that we should have learned, but we didn't, was that you don't start a war for lies. The Tonkin Gulf was a lie. The weapons of mass destruction was a lie. The nerve gas was a lie.
A lie.
If you want your citizens to be behind the war, you have to tell them the truth. The second lesson that we should have learned is that we're going to be paying for this war for 30 years. When Uncle Sam borrows money, he sells bonds. And just like in Vietnam, we're running this war as a deficit. The longest running bond that Uncle Sam sells is a 30-year Treasury bond. So we're going to be paying for this war for the next 30 years, just as we did with Vietnam. We finally paid off Vietnam about 2 years ago. Every dollar that went to pay for that 30-year-old war was a dollar that you couldn't use for education or for environment or for infrastructure or any of the other things that we need here, medical care in this country, education, all those kind of things that we need.
Yesterday I opened up the New York Times, and in it they had the pictures of the last 1,000 soldiers to have died in Iraq. The pictures went on and on.
Oh my.
Page after page of photographs and names. We hear these numbers, but we must remember that there are real human beings behind those numbers. There is real flesh and blood that has been lost. There, for every soldier, there is a family that has lost someone they love very much. These are human beings. They write poetry. They have lovers. They are lost to people who care very much about them. They're not just numbers. We have to stop losing these young people in this battle. We have to stop sending more soldiers over there over and over again. The ones who are dead are not the only victims, are they? The ones who are injured often wish they were dead. And those who come home with no physical injuries are haunted the rest of their lives with the memories of this war, and many with serious post-traumatic stress disorder. We are crippling a whole generation of young people. We have to stop war as a means of solving problems, and we have to stop this war. Don't forget the human faces behind these numbers. Thank you.
As we talk about our young people, it's so important in terms of how this affects them and their issues. I want to introduce you to Cash Schwartfager. who's a new member of the Peace Action Steering Committee and also part of the Youth Action Committee. He's a leader of Students for Peace out at UW-Waukesha. Let's all welcome Cass.
As I read the news of the 3,000th military casualty in Iraq, I thought of the sacrifices our soldiers had to make. I thought of a war that has cost us 3,000 people, many of whom are people my age. I thought of a war so large in scale that we don't even know how many innocent citizens have died as a result of our invasion. And I asked myself why. As a youth, why do I accept the fact that people my age are headed off to fight in the Middle East? I remember back to 2003 when the WMDs were about to blow us all up. And then I remember them never existing. I remember back when Bush told us that Al-Qaeda and Saddam Hussein were going to work together. And I remember that never happening. And finally, I remember the idea that terrorism would spread to the United States if we did not win this fight in Iraq. And then I remember the threat of the communism in Vietnam War and how neither threats are true. Just as we standing here would never give our lives for a cause lost like the WMDs in Iraq, so must we work to prevent the needless sacrifice of others to such a cause. We as youth must join the voices calling for justice. We must educate ourselves, talk to those interested in joining the military, tell them that 1 in 4 homeless men is a veteran, show them alternate ways to pay for college. We as youth can no longer accept a war that this administration paints up with patriotism. A war fought to free people from those who only want to be free of us. It is up to the youth to stand up and be something real. Set aside the trivial garbage that you won't remember come next year, and let the administration know that if they want to continue to fight for a piece of Iraq, they're going to have us to answer to. We need to rise up and shape the world to a better image. Thank you very much.
Cass Schwartzfeger. I would hope that as many of you would join us in a theatrical die-in at this time. And what we want to do is take positions along the steps and the sidewalk and lay down on the ground as if we were victims of war.
Jeff here. Trevor Eastman. Donald Pico. John Kurth. Mark Maida. Stephen Martin. Shane O'Donnell. Todd Olson. Eric Palmisano.
And then the maladies of war. Depleted uranium that's affecting our veterans as they come home, and their children are born with cancers and deformity. We can't not talk about that and not mention the 500,000 Iraqis who've died during the last 10 years behind depleted uranium. As we're here to commemorate our own men and women, let us not forget the more than 600,000 Iraqis, mainly women and children, who've suffered through this war. What are we going to do about it? Where do we go from here? Like everybody to welcome Sister Bertine Lowinger. Bertine. Hi, sister! Yeah! Woo!
What are we going to do about it? That is the question. What are you willing to do about it? It is not enough to come here and remember our 3,000 or the 500,000 in Iraq. We, the choir, are the ones that have to stop it. Our Congress, who we are now putting in there, and who got there because we said end the war.
Yeah.
That's right. Do they sound like they're going to end it?
No.
Then who will make them end it?
We will.
We will.
We will.
And that's going to ask of us a tremendous challenge in the next 3 months. Are we up to it?
Yes.
Are we up to it?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. We know that in the last 8 votes, the Senate has voted almost unanimously for funds every single time. We've got 100 senators who are not going to be willing to vote against funding. And it's up to us, from the groundswell of the people, from the groundswell of all of this nation, we are the only ones who can make this Congress hold to end the war. They will not do it because it is against every principle of any Congress to vote against funds for war. And only in Vietnam, at the very end, did we get the funds stopped. And when the funds stop, the war stops. When the funds stop, the war stops.
We will end this occupation. We will do this. And what we do here at home is just as important as what we do nationally. The weekend of January 27th through 29th, United for Peace and Justice is calling for a mobilization on this new Congress. And those of you who can do it, we ask you to join us. Peace Action is organizing a bus. People are going by plane, by train, by car. Let's get there if we can. Let's march as Wisconsin. Last thing I'd like for us to hear from Art Heitzer, Peace Action Steering Committee, National Lawyers Guild, and the Coalition to Normalize Relationships with Cuba. Art.
How many of you were around and part of the movement to end the war in Vietnam? Raise your hand. All right. Lots of folks. So, you know, and the other folks either have learned or can learn, that getting the majority of the country against the war is step one. How many years after we had the majority of the country against the Vietnam War did the war continue? Many. Years and years and years. We have a majority of the country clearly against this war. That does not mean next month or next spring, Congress or the administration or the next administration in 2.5 years is going to end this war. Hopefully, but not necessarily. The war in Vietnam ended because 2 things happened. One, as Sister Virginia and others have mentioned, Congress cut off the money for the war. The U.S. Constitution says that the power to declare war belongs to one body, the Congress. The power to raise money for the military belongs to one body, Congress. It also says that under Article 6, that the supreme law of the land includes any ratified treaty, which includes the UN Charter, which makes this whole war entirely illegal. Now, what was the other factor that forced that war to end? The troops refused to fight. How many of you know or have heard of Lieutenant Aaron Watada? Yeah! Lieutenant Aaron Watada is the first U.S. military officer, not the first soldier, there's growing numbers of them, the first officer to refuse orders to Iraq. Lieutenant Watada is not a pacifist. He's a career military person, but he says this is an illegal war, and he is facing 6 years in prison. Make sure you follow it. Make sure people know about it. Make sure he and other military people find support when they say no more fighting in Iraq. They're not going. No more recruits. People in your high schools, etc. That's not the way to go.
I'd like to introduce Mark Foreman from Vets for Peace to talk about what's happening in Milwaukee at the end of the month.
I hope everybody can make it to Washington, but I know many of you won't be able to. So Veterans for Peace is going to have our own Stop the War event down at City Hall on Friday, January 26th, and at 5 o'clock. Okay, we're going to hang our banners for a week down there. But stop the war now, stop the spending now. But we hope all of you will fill City Hall. Those of you that don't go to Washington will fill City Hall. So please remember, Friday, January 26th at 5 o'clock. Thank you.
Think about the Military Commissions Act. I think it's one of the most atrocious things that our Congress has ever done. Very intentionally, it's felt within the peace community that this is directed at activists who are fighting this regime and trying to make things change. The whole other concept of an unbid contract again for billions of dollars in a secret location, I thought this was democracy. I thought we had clarity in our government, and something as atrocious comes down to this to impugn U.S. citizens, it's got to be repealed. There's no question about it.